The Old Mill restaurant in Houghton, Norfolk, sits 30 yards off the main A road which links the villages of Houghton and Wroxham. The bridge and the River Bure are a dividing line between them both. Most people visiting the village of Houghton incorrectly assume they are, in fact, in Wroxham. An easy mistake because many of the businesses have Wroxham attached to their name, such as Hotel Wroxham and Wroxham Saddlery, to name but two. This has occurred because over 100 years ago, when the rail network was being planned, it was originally positioned well into the Wroxham side of the river, and this was where it was situated on the original maps, denoting the county rail links. Thus, even when the train station was located in Houghton, the well-known village was still Wroxham, so these first businesses adopted that village as their address. Best not mention Wroxham Barns, which is located 2 miles away and in a different village entirely. Unlike the two restaurants which are positioned on the Wroxham side of the River Bure, the Old Mill restaurant and cafe bar is a family-run business, 34 years in point of fact, from which it owes its more friendly and homely qualities. This has always been Scott Dalton's favourite eatery in his home village, and he has paid it many visits with family, friends or girlfriends in his history. The change made to the premises since his last visit, which is most notable to him in a large black and white photograph of the two owners, brothers David and Brian, in their youth. The picture is a nice touch, thinks Scott, and it raises a smile from him when he thinks how people grow yet fundamentally bear familiar physical characteristics throughout their life. Scott doesn't think he has altered much, really, since he last patronised these premises. Has it been so many months? Maybe he has got a bit more world weariness about his face. The small goatee-style beard, which, according to Surrey, is very fashionable, gives him a sense of masculinity and maturity, and his muscles have bulked out since his training with the CIA. Scrambled eggs on toast with a large black coffee have been served before him at one of the outdoor tables. The smell of coffee and warm early morning air makes Scott feel temporarily exhilarated. He realises his current state of being won't last too long, so he's making the most of it now. Watching some swans paddling languorously across the river. Some early risers are feeding ducks. A few boating tourists are rising to greet the new day, which is starting off quite splendiferously. A steady rumble of traffic passes over the water bridge. Idyllic is not a word to be used lightly, although these days, along with hero and literally, it is perhaps used out of context too much. But this very morning, this weather, this location is idyllic. There is a fresh cleanliness to the air, which is difficult to find in London despite the open spaces. Not that the town is too smog-filled in comparison to, say, Tokyo, where he was just a few weeks ago. Scott hadn't much free time to go exploring the city while there, and the studio where he was based was right next to a lovely park, but a young Japanese lady with whom he had a dalliance showed him a few of the sites of significance. Japanese culture has such a long historic tradition, which has been affected by Western values, which Scott isn't necessarily sure is a good thing. But of course this can be applicable to many nations the world over, and why there are still wars going on within those who remain to wish as they were. "How is it, man?" asks Brian, the younger brother of the two. "Splendiferous," Scott replies sincerely. "Better than I remember, thanks. Nice touch with a picture of you and Dave, by the way." Brian nods with a smile. "Haven't seen you for a while. Takings are down," Brian says, tongue-in-cheek. "Thought maybe you'd left the country." "I have been abroad," Scott replies with a light laughter, "but it was for work. How have you been?" "Still here," Brian bobs his head. "Working for the tax man. Been thinking about retiring for the last 10 years. Haven't got the time. Anyway, catch you again soon, man, and enjoy." Brian walks off to cheerily tend to other customers who start entering the premises, studying the generous wall menu, greeting them with a jolly morning and smile. A young, cocky, arrogant family whose first time it probably is on a boat, and the Norfolk Broads, are having fun attempting to negotiate the low bridge from the opposite side, shouting commands and directions to each other in a massive confusion which somehow gets them safely through. The looks of relief are immense. The shake of a head from the starboard side indicates that they were not entirely successful in their navigation. This makes Scott smile with a moment's wishful recollection of a similar endeavour involving his cocksure Uncle Robert and the loss of an aerial. Two men, who now take a pair of seats in the corner of the outside seating area, immediately strike Scott as being sorely out of place. One is a skinny runt, dressed a bit like a city spiv in his too big white frilly shirt, pencil-thin tie and black trousers and tiny shoes, with a grotesque face that looks like it's been smashed inward at the nose. His bald-headed companion wears a tight rugby shirt, tight shorts and trainers, and is a veritable man-mountain. Scott finds it next to impossible not to stare at these ghastly grotesques who might feel at home in a comic book rogues gallery. They make his skin crawl and are setting off some sixth sense warning signs. Maybe he is being too paranoid because they haven't given him a single glance yet. Perhaps they're city boy lovers on a day trip, who knows? Scott wonders if his stereotyping of his people is making him prejudiced. There is definitely something off about them, and it isn't simply their appearance. At least if they intend to send him sleeping with the fishes, he is in the right location. Another question Scott poses to himself when he reaches the dregs of his coffee mug is, if they are after him, who do they work for? Only a select few know his destination. These clients do not resemble even MI5's least elite. Could it be possible for the same organisation behind Xenia's prison break to send these two after him? But why? Xenia was out for revenge. Unless the organisation hoped she was going to succeed, because she did not, they have sent more. But again, why? They could have gotten him earlier than this. If they are after him, what are they attempting to prevent? Do they know he is onto the Lord Herring? Have they been onto TC's operation right from the beginning? Certainly these two goons are just hired muscle, because they do not appear to have many brains between them. Why am I reading too much into things? My own paranoia, since Xenia, and Sir Miles, Scott wonders. He realises there is only one way to find out. Thanks, Brian, Scott says to his host as he rises from his chair. I will try not to leave it too long a gap until my next visit. Don't be a stranger, Brian quips. Grinning, Scott pokes his head through the restaurant entrance and bids David goodbye, the elder brother busy serving behind the counter, before deliberately pausing while he pretends to decide which direction to take. Scott notices movements from the two goons in his peripheral vision, nods to himself before passing them by, striding casually down the slope towards the quayside with a grin of satisfaction upon his face. Keeping up the pretense, Scott ambles along, smiling at the tourists, studying the water vessels and the wildlife with interest, pretending to suck in the air in as relaxed a manner as possible. Scott smiles pleasantly at a woman dressed in next to nothing who is tying her craft mooring ropes to the quayside cleats and reveals a bit more cheek than intended. All the while Scott has been watching, but not watching, Spiv and Man Mountain as they too rise from their seats and attempt to be casual in their walking pursuit of him. Scott wonders how good they are at their job and for how long they will follow until they pounce. They cannot possibly be local boys, so he has the definite upper hand. He just needs to decide where and at what point to lose them. Pigeons and seagulls flutter about the footpath, reluctantly getting out of the way in the desperate scavenge for food which may have been dropped in the beer garden, as Scott turns 90 degrees left and then 90 degrees right as he negotiates the gravel surfaced quayside. The gravel here will be difficult to make purchase upon should Scott make a run for it, so he bides his time, waiting for the opportune moment, while dodging the other pedestrians will also be a challenge. Tourists do have all the time in the world, after all. As the quayside widens, hedgerows and benches to Scott's left, with trees sectioning off the separate picnic area ahead, he decides that once he reaches the trees, they shall obscure his pursuer's line of sight enough to offer the opportunity of gaining distance, if not losing him completely. Either way, Scott shall be forced to double back. But as stated earlier, he definitely has the advantage. Scott hazards a brief glance behind him. Spiff has his phone out and is smiling at it. Man Mounting is loping doe-eyed alongside it. Picking his moment when out of sight, Scott sprints forward, his feet kicking up the gravel. wind in his face, people giving him cursory glances. A scream and a few shouts come from some distance behind him, which suggests the walking pursuit is now a running chase, making Scott wonder how on earth they could be so quick to respond unless they are somehow tracking him. But the only means of doing this is via the GPS in his smartphone. It's true, this organisation is well equipped. One gunshot rings out, and the bark of a tree splinters to his left, forcing Scott to divert his course without looking back. Dodging behind the tree just hit, and across the grass toward a small footbridge which he crosses, continuing beyond the footpath leading to the car park, under a railway bridge and into the quayside which, much to his chagrin, he chastises himself for his stupidity, will eventually become a dead end. Moored craft line the quayside as he continues at a run, too large to commandeer, but there is a man untethering his small rowboat, which has a running outboard motor, so without hesitation Scott comes to a skidding stop and jumps unsteadily aboard. "Here, what's going on here, boy?" the boat owner exclaims with much displeasure in his Norfolk accented bellow. "I'm being followed," Scott states, looking along the quayside where Man Mountain lumbers, and he is unarmed, which is a bonus because it must mean Scott created enough confusion amongst the pair that Spiv has taken the wrong path. His friend has a gun and won't be far behind. "Can you help?" At first, Scott thinks this man is going to refuse. They have already drifted into the River Bure, and Scott doesn't favour his swimming ability. But after due consideration, the man applies gentle acceleration and they pull out a safer distance from Man Mountain, although he does hesitate briefly. The rowboat under power puts away at a steady 5 miles per hour, its owner regarding both Scott and the man on the shore with mild curiosity. "Thank you," Scott offers. "Believe it or not, I work for Scotland Yard," he lies. Man Mountain is now jogging along the quayside back the way he came, keeping a pace with them and grinning at Scott because the retreat isn't exactly hasty. Not looking where he's going, and promptly knocks into Spiv running to meet him, the gun going off as it hits the quayside before landing in the river. Scott laughs to himself and doffs an imaginary hat. "They want to kill me," Scott informs the boat owner casually, which elicits no response. "Can you go a little bit faster, please?" "Sorry, boy," the reply is unapologetic, "but I sticking at that there speed limit." "You jest." The man slowly shakes his head, happily chugging away without a care in the world. "Where you want me to set your doom be?" the man asks. "I'll, let you know." Across on the quayside, Man Mountain is bounding ahead of Spiv, the smaller man fervently searching for a vessel with which to pursue Scott. But all the moored craft are big pleasure cruisers, which will take too long to launch to be worthy of an attempt, until he comes upon a craft with a smaller powered boat tethered aft. Much to the hire of the craft's annoyance, Spiv skitters across the deck and ungraciously jumps aboard the smaller vessel, which he promptly unties and somehow gets going with surreal expertise. Scott shakes his head in disbelief, reminding himself to not be too quick to judge others by their appearance. "The little guy now has a boat of his own," Scott tells his own pilot. "I'm not entirely convinced his scruples about river speed restrictions meet your own, but if there's any chance you might break your own rules and those of the local authority might be capricious of you to speed up now." The boat owner slowly turns his head to the direction in which Scott is looking, evaluates the situation in his own inimitable manner, and returns to piloting, but increases the speed ever so imperceptibly. Ahead is the bridge. Scott rapidly formulates a plan which he tells his pilot, trying to physically urge the rowboat on a faster pace while keeping one eye on the pursuer in the boat. Spiv now struggling to increase the power from it, impatience and frustration, no, literally, written across his face. Striding confidently atop the bridge now is Man Mountain, casting people asunder without breaking stride, until he steps over the safety rail on the opposite side to where Scott and the rowboat now chug. Spiv has now given up his pursuit, the engine of his craft having cut out on him, so he shouts and uses a variety of colourful metaphors to express his feelings. As the shadow of the bridge draws over them, Scott stands, balancing as best he can with one foot on the starboard side of the rowboat, which is nearest the land, when he comes out from under it. "Thank you," Scott says to his saviour. "That's all right, thee." Lithely stepping off the rowboat onto the stern of a moored pleasure craft, just as Man Mountain jumps off from the bridge, Scott almost skitters backwards whence he came, before successfully counteracting his loss of balance. Man Mountain lands heavily into the rowboat, smashing cleanly through the planking, and disappears into the water. Not waiting to see the outcome, and wishing to distance himself from the most exciting village event in ages, Scott swiftly beats his retreat from the scene.